off today. So thank you all for coming. You've been told thank you so many times, you should all feel really appreciated by now. Last quarter, I completed my senior project wherein I self-designed and solo taught a class here at Fairhaven, much like Morgan did. It was a year-long process, but because Morgan already covered that, I'm not going to talk about the details here today. Instead, I want to talk to you about my experience standing on the border of worlds in this environment. So as I mentioned, I undertook a teaching year for my senior project. Over the course of that year, I worked with my advisor to research and create a class, which I then taught last quarter. My class was called The Future of the Book. This image is from the 1935 issue of Everyday Science and Mechanics. It shows you the 1935 idea of an electronic book. It was never my intention to teach. I came here because I want to write. I'm about to graduate in 3 short weeks with a double major, one in creative writing from Maine campus, and I've also completed a Fairhaven concentration, which I titled Editing and Publishing Innovation. Because of this, I seriously considered a large-scale publication for my project, but my concentration is centered around the ways that the marginalized voice is impacted by the current publishing climate. And I had already given a year as the editor-in-chief of InkSpeak here at Fairhaven. And so at a certain point, I realized that I didn't have the resources and support for that area of my work and the ways that marginalized voices are impacted. Then, in realizing that, I realized that I might want to teach on that topic. Realizing that I wanted to teach set me up for a unique experience. While I was a teacher in one room, I was a student in another. I would rush from my 21st Century American Lit class, and I would hustle across campus to my car, where I would whip off my hoodie and pull on my blazer like some kind of demented Mr. Rogers. I had spent nearly 4 years convincing these students that I was their peer. By this, I mean I wasn't their substitute mother. I wasn't Mrs. Robinson. I wasn't a professor's spy, and I wasn't an outsider. I had made friends with them in a way that was broad-minded and inclusive of our differences, while focused on our commonalities. I understood the struggles that they faced with professors because I shared them. Suddenly, I was standing in front of them, asking them to see me as a teacher, asking them to view me differently. I held my breath and waited to see if they would view me as a sellout instead, or if it was even possible to make the transition. And the first day went smoothly, and the second, and by the third class, however, they were turning in their first assignment, one that I had left open and worked into slowly. No problem, I thought. I had it back in 2 days and wondered why so many of my professors had failed me in this regard. Naturally, you can already guess that by the 7th week of class, that arrogance had evaporated into chagrin as I went from my student outlook, which regularly complained that my writing professors were always restricting our page count and forcing us into unnatural boundaries when I yearned to fly free and spread my words across the page so as to learn long-form writing. And why did they constantly restrain us to flash fiction and single-page essays? But as a teacher, I pulled out my collected assignments one day and realized it contained at least 75 pages, each of which would require my thoughtful, careful attention and editing. I suddenly realized flash fiction and single-page essays aren't so bad. And I learned if you ask for pages, you will get pages. I believe my mother called this, careful what you wish for. Every day before class, I would arrive early and rearrange the room. I had this crazy idea that I wanted my students to face each other instead of me. I wanted them to feel that they were in a space like only Fairhaven can provide, which is to say that they were surrounded by books, sitting in a circle, and felt connected and open with each other enough to engage in lively, open-hearted discussion. I would, for my part, create a space that encouraged this kind of atmosphere by dutifully moving the furniture. They'll love it, I thought, and most did. But of this experience, one of my students, this being her first Fairhaven class, wrote in her final evaluation that she was, quote, innately opposed to the proximity of my classmates. Well, another then wrote, it was one of the first times in my career at Fairhaven that I felt comfortable releasing my inhibitions and speaking out openly. I learned you can't please everyone, but you can please some, and at different times so that everyone finds something to be pleased about. After a trip to special collections, one of my students became excited with the Fishtown collection, such that she spent the remainder of her quarter researching and getting in touch with the former residents. Ultimately, she had her final project added to the Fishtown selection and special collections here in the library. And I learned that seeing that incendiary moment and having had a hand in it is the single greatest reward of teaching. Along the way, I encountered a student who challenged me with a stellar lack of investment. But I engaged with them and helped them work through the final week to help them pass. I found that there are those for whom their time here is a sentence, and there are those for whom it is a gift. Both are valid experiences. In fact, one of my students in their class evaluation, when asked how the instructor could improve their teaching, wrote that I should let them leave early more often. I learned that professors feel more responsible for the student experience than they let on. Another of my students in their final evaluation wrote that although most of the texts were great, the teacher should rewrite the boring one. While I am deeply flattered at their confidence in my writing ability and the belief that I know the material well enough to rewrite it, I did realize that you can learn your material more thoroughly by teaching it than through studying it. Now, I wish I could say that I came to class every day in a suit jacket with my notes in perfect order and that I was always performing at my best. But the truth is that I had days where I felt like I barely moved the class forward at all, and other days which were giant leaps. By the last week of the quarter, I was so exhausted with the juggle of worlds that my final class was conducted in a hoodie. Yet, wardrobe aside, several of my students told me they were honored to have been a part of my first class, and that my future students would be lucky to have me. Another of the students in their final evaluation wrote, "This course was thought-provoking and insightful." Since I think provocation is important, I'm going to call that one a win. The evaluations for my course had statements like these. I really enjoyed the way the discussions were facilitated, and I thought the feedback for the assignments was quite motivational. As we dove into the unknown areas, we made connections on the fly through her facilitation. That one had a sort of Star Trek feel to it. I really liked that one. Explained the concepts clearly, had a sense of humor. That was also my favorite. Responded to questions promptly. I learned that rather than investing in the room or my clothing choices, the experience of my students comes from my enthusiasm for my work, and that teaching happens not when students are told what to think or how to think, but when they're given something to think about. Standing in between worlds has been the nature of my time here at university. My presence has been one of both rather than either. I am both a student here and the mother of two students here. I am both friend and stranger, both experienced and clueless, excited for the next phase and completely terrified. Becoming a teacher while also a student is the newest addition to the many mutually inclusive binaries that punctuate my time here. Lastly, I could never have walked into this role and the future that's now awaiting me if it hadn't been for the support of my advisor, the curriculum committee, and Dean Herring. Their belief in me built the bridge between two worlds that invited me across it. They showed me what belief in an individual can do. There wasn't a week where a staff member didn't approach me in the hallway to ask me how it was going, offer advice, and encourage me to keep going. Look, I know I didn't create world peace. I taught a class. This is something people all over the world do every single day. But in order to get there, somebody had to invite me across the bridge. Who knew on the other side I would find my heart? So what's next for me? I have been admitted to the MFA program at Arizona State University, where I will teach composition and creative writing while studying poetry, book arts, and critical theory. I'm still keeping one foot in each world, living as a both rather than an either. Some things I'm keeping in mind for the next phase. I'll mind my paper lengths that allow that some people need to break out of them, and there should be room for them to do so. I'll remember that you can't please everyone, but you should provide opportunity for everyone to be pleased. I'll arrange the room with care and curate the experience of my students. I'll tell them I believe in them. But when I pack for Tempe, I'll leave the hoodie in Pelican.